Our background information focuses on how socioeconomic status can have a major impact on an individual's lifestyle. Health and well-being are two key aspects that play a role in an individual's life. When adding health inequalities, it can sometimes alter one's physical health. In 2018, JMA distributed an article explaining how being physically active is one of the most impactful behaviors anyone can engage in to improve their health. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommends at least 150 minutes per week of moderate-intensity physical activity. Identifying these determinants and inequalities in our community can help find solutions to promote higher levels of physical activity and bring overall health to the community. During our research, we found that individuals with low income are often left with limited resources, struggling to have the time and money to focus on their health. However, individuals with higher incomes often have access to multiple resources. When analyzing low socioeconomic neighborhoods, we can see that several factors play a possible role in one's physical activity. These factors can include the increasing crime rates, higher traffic areas, and the accessibility of equipment and the quality of equipment. In contrast, higher income neighborhoods typically have reduced issues with crime and traffic, easier accessibility to equipment, and better quality of equipment. Along with this, higher income individuals can typically afford a gym membership or resources to build their own gym at home. When comparing individuals who have a higher or better socioeconomic status than those who come from a lower socioeconomic status, one can see that lower socioeconomic standing can typically have a poorer health status due to not being able to acquire proper forms of health. Some other factors include, but not limited to, accessibility of safe gyms or parks, consuming a poor diet, and not being knowledgeable about proper health. The significance of this study is to focus on analyzing the correlation between an individual's income and their physical activity level. This study further evaluates whether socioeconomic status influences determinants of physical activity, and if so, which socioeconomic level is most impacted by these determinants. The results of this study will provide information regarding the physical activity levels that are common within multiple social classes, as well as an understanding of why there may be discrepancies of activity levels between socioeconomic groups. Our research questions include: does income directly affect an individual's physical activity? To what extent does income affect an individual's physical activity? Is there a direct correlation to one's socioeconomic status and their physical activity? Our research sub-questions are: is there a difference between the different socioeconomic groups and their physical activity? Does coming from a low socioeconomic status alter one's ability to achieve higher rates of physical activity? Does coming from a middle to high socioeconomic status have a positive influence on one's physical activity?
Our first hypothesis is that individuals with low socioeconomic status will report with low physical activity. Our second is that it is expected that an individual's income and their physical activity will be directly proportional. And our null hypothesis is that an individual's socioeconomic status will show no correlation to their level of physical activity. Our sub-hypothesis is that individuals that live in neighborhoods that provide safe facilities such as recreational centers or parks and jogging trails will show higher levels of physical activity than an individual whose neighborhoods do not provide these facilities. Our study would be considered to be a cross-sectional study because the study is done at one single point in time and we are looking at several characteristics at once. Our independent variable is the participant's level of income, and our dependent variable is the amount of physical activity that the participant performs either daily or weekly. The sample of our study called for 500 participants with ages ranging from 18 to 60 years old. Our participants were given a link to fill out a survey. They were asked to complete the survey once they received it. In order to complete the survey, participants will need access to a smartphone or computer with Wi-Fi. We are assuming that participants will answer the survey questions with honesty and accuracy. We are assuming that the participants will understand their socioeconomic status, and we are assuming that the participants track their physical activity throughout a day-to-day basis. Some of the delimitations of our study include that participants in this study must be between the ages of 18 to 60, they must not be pregnant, have any pre-existing heart conditions, they must know their socioeconomic status, they must not have any orthopedic injuries, or any limitations that cause the inability to perform physical activity. The limitations include that participants in the study will need to have access to a computer or a smartphone to complete our survey. Our study is survey-based, so our data will be based on honest answers from the participants in this study.
For the data collecting methods and measures, we formed a survey to gather information and data from our participants. This survey was distributed by mass email to all HES students and shared by link by our group. For the survey contents, the IPAC was used. IPAC scoring method was performed. Vigorous activity, multiplying 8 minutes of vigorous activity and number of days performing vigorous activity. Moderate activity, multiplying 4 minutes of moderate activity and number of days performing moderate activity. And walking, multiplying 3.3 minutes of walking at work and numbers of days walking. And we also use demographic questions. The list of demographic questions that were asked are: what is your age range? Do you have a job, part-time, full-time, or no? If you receive hourly pay, what range applies to you? If you receive a salary, what range applies to you? Do you receive money from an outside source? Someone that is not yourself, could be your parents, guardians, financial aid, government assistance, or other. What facilities/resources do you safely have available within your neighborhood? If there is a gym in your area, what is the average monthly cost for a gym membership, or what would you be willing to pay per month? Do you feel that your income has an effect on the amount of physical activity you participate in? What factors do you think could influence the amount of physical activity you do or do not participate in? If there is a gym in your area, what is the average monthly cost for a gym membership, or what would you be willing to pay per month? If you answered the previous question, would you be able to afford a gym membership based on the monthly cost? Does your job affect your physical activity outside of work? For instance, do you perform heavy lifting, stand all day, or exerting a lot of energy to where you do not feel like going to exercise? The questions that were asked based on physical activity were: during the last 7 days, on how many days did you do vigorous physical activities like heavy lifting, digging, aerobics, or fast bicycling? How much time did you usually spend doing vigorous physical activities on one of those days? During the last 7 days, on how many days did you do moderate physical activities like carrying light loads, bicycling at a regular pace, or do double tennis? Do not include walking. How much time did you usually spend doing moderate physical activities on one of those days? During the last 7 days, on how many days did you walk for at least 10 minutes at a time? How much time did you usually spend walking on one of those days? During the last 7 days, how much time did you spend sitting on a weekday?
The next few slides, we will be looking at the age ranges of our participants along with their hourly pay, how often they work in the work week, or if they have a job or not. We had a total of 170 participants participate in the study. Our participants are separated into 5 different groups based on their ages. Our first group is 18 to 23, then 24 to 30, then 31 to 39, and then 40 to 49, and then 50 to 60. We can see that the ages from 18 to 30 are the top population of this study just based off the percentages on the pie chart. Now, on the next few slides, the graphs will be very similar. Here on this slide, we are looking at the age ranges of 18 to 23. We break the graph down between the total number of participants we had in this age range along with how often they work during the work week and their hourly pay or if they receive salary. As you can see, the total number of participants to lead this age group are less than part-time workers, whereas full-time workers are the lowest and part-time and having no job is roughly the same. Here on this slide, we are looking at the age group of 24 to 30. In this age group, the total number of participants to lead this group are full-time workers, whereas less than part-time and part-time workers are about the same, and having no job is the lowest. This next slide shows the age ranges of 31 to 39. In this group, we can see that full-time workers lead this age range. However, less than part-time workers, and having no job are very low or non-existent.
This next slide is very similar to the previous slide. On this slide, we are looking at participants between the ages of 40 to 49. We can see that full-time workers lead this age range, which leaves less than part-time workers, and having no job to be very low or non-existent. This last slide of our participants is similar to the last two slides. We are looking at the age ranges of 50 to 60. We show that full-time workers lead this age range, which leaves less than part-time workers at a low and part-time workers or having no job to be non-existent.
For our data, we used a software from IBM and entered it into SBS. Before running these tests, we had to organize our data into categories from 1 to 5 for our income and organize our physical activity. For our physical activity data, we organized it into vigorous, moderate, and walking physical activity METs, and then also our total METs for physical activity, which is sum of all the previous METs. When organizing our participants' income into categories, we had to adjust our data from showing hourly or salary to monthly earnings across all participants and organize them into 5 ranges. For the test we used to run our data, we used an analysis of variance test, or ANOVA. It is a statistical method in which the variation in a set of observation is divided into distinct components. This was used in our experiment to organize our income into 5 categories. It was also used in our experiment to compare the value of total physical activity and types of physical activity across the 5 income categories. We also used a Spearman's row. It is a non-parametric correlation for categorical arrangement. This was used in our experiment to calculate our correlation's coefficient. It was also mainly used to calculate how related the categories of physical activity are to each other, and most importantly, how physical activity relates to their organized income categories.
So moving on to results, if we look at all the data gathered from our surveys, it showed us that the total physical activity was very similar across the ranges of monthly income. Pretty much category 4 ranging between $4,300 to $6,299 a month, and monthly income led in all the categories of physical activity except for the vigorous physical activity. And category 1 ranging between $0 and $1,099 a month led in vigorous physical activity. Looking at our graphs here, this one is the descriptive statistic results for total physical activity. And this is the sum of vigorous, the moderate, and the walking physical activity. As you can see here, this is the 5 categories, lowest starting at 1 and the highest starting at 5. Category 4 for monthly income actually leads in total physical activity, while category 2 for monthly income has the least amount of total physical activity. If you look towards the bottom, number 4 has 3,749 METs, and then number 2 has 2,781 METs. This next graph shows us vigorous physical activity, and looking at category 1, monthly income, this leads in the vigorous physical activity at 1,532, and the least comes in at category 2 with 1,156, and 5 is really not far behind it. Looking at the next graph, we're going to be looking at the descriptive statistics for moderate physical activity. And if we're looking at monthly incomes, category 4 leads in that moderate physical activity with 679 METs, while category 5 has the least amount of moderate physical activity. And surprisingly, number 1 is actually second to most with 500. All right, now the next graph is going to be talking about walking physical activity. And again, category 4 has the highest in walking physical activity, while 2 has the least amount. And if we're looking at these numbers here, category 1 is like third compared, and like terms of just how much activity they do in terms of walking. So on to the next slide, we're going to be talking about how our results relate to our hypothesis. So for our first hypothesis, we were looking at how if there was any correlation between income and physical activity. Well, based off our results, we came to the conclusion that there wasn't any kind of correlation between income and physical activity. So we would reject our first hypothesis. And onto our next hypothesis, that one talks about how an individual's income is directly proportional to their physical activity. And based off our results, we saw that there wasn't really any kind of correlation or proportion that was related between them. So we would have to reject that one as well. And our third hypothesis would be our null hypothesis, and that says that there is no correlation between income and physical activity. And based off of results, we would have to accept that one.
Did we find what we expected? We did not find what we were expecting. Why? We expected that people with lower income would have a lower level of physical activity. And we also expected that people with higher income would have a higher level of physical activity. Our results showed that physical activity was similar across all categories of income. For broader implications, our data showed an unusually high level of physical activity in all age ranges, which may not be accurate for the general population. Our data may have been influenced by the fact that we are on a college campus and more people are walking for transportation and leisure than other samples we could have gotten from Norman, Oklahoma, or the broader U.S. In conclusion, we cannot completely imply that there is no correlation between income and physical activity in general, only from our sample group.